I don't want to be sad for me. Be happy. Don't cry.
So welcome to chapter 6, titled If I Go Mad, Funeral in My Head. And that's the song, that was my favorite song at the time, that I just played you just now. I want to make a note before I start chapter 6, the final chapter of the book. And that's that I just wanted to point out that everything that I've said so far was already written at the same time that I wrote book 1. But as I mentioned earlier, I couldn't finish book 2 just because every time I looked at it, I hated it. I hated it because I felt like it was just gloating and basking and that everything was great, and it didn't inspire me to talk about it. But after this last experience, this last chapter that's been going on since then, completes it. This is what makes it complete. So now I'm inspired to share the story. So chapter 6, If I Go Mad, Funeral in My Head. I thought it would end there, with the fairy tale ending, but this would be no fairy tale. My world would soon spin out in such a way that it was no longer recognizable. Everything that I thought to be my world turned out not to be. When I began work on my book in 2011, I had to outline my understanding of the triune in such a way that I could write about it in great detail. I got so obsessed and one-pointed with the triune that my absorption in it came at the expense of everything else in my life. The very peak of realizing the triune is seeing that this is it. The Dharmakaya, the absolute or undifferentiated awareness, is the Nirmanakaya, or the relative, differentiated awareness. And the very last thing that I ever wrote in my journal was how I saw the triune in what had become my favorite Zen expression. I had a bumper sticker that I kept inside my car that quoted from Zen master Dogen the following: "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the body and mind of others, drops away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly." So, what I wanted to do, the note that I left myself was to explain the triune through that Zen expression by Dogen. So I'm going to go ahead and put up my picture of the triune, how I see it, and explain it to you through that. So I'm going to pause this. All right, so now we're going to go over that Zen expression and correlate it to the diagram of the triune. So to study the Buddha way is to study the self. This is where you start. The center, or the self, which I see as the fold. And incidentally, I came up with a good way to show you why I call it the fold and how it's important in so many different ways. So all there is awareness, which is the void, but the nature of awareness is to be aware, and the very nature of awareness is to be aware, and since there's nothing else, okay. All right, so now we're going to begin over again with the Zen, that same Zen expression, but I'm going to correlate it to the triune. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. This is where you start, the center, or the self, which I see as a fold. And I came up with an interesting way to show you what I mean by the fold in terms of awareness. So as I've already said before, that all there is awareness, which is this, the void, And the nature of awareness is to be aware, but there's nothing else to be aware of. So awareness naturally becomes aware of itself. And what that power of attraction does is it creates like a black hole, like a vortex, to where nothingness is attracted to nothingness. So it forms a black hole. And in that, now you have the fold, or what I called a loop or a bubble in the first book. When awareness becomes attracted to itself, it folds to create the appearance of the world and you. So you are the crease, you are the fold, and the world is the result of the void closing or folding. Sorry. So if you look at it through the prism of Christianity, their Trinity, then this would be the Son. You have Father, Son, Holy Ghost. If you look at it through Sat Chidananda, you have Sat, which is just existence. You have Chit, which is individual, consciousness. And then you have Bliss, which is the world. Or from the prism of Zen, this would be where rivers are just rivers and mountains are just mountains. Or you could look at this as the caterpillar stage. Or in Dzogchen, this would be the base, or mountains. Or you could say this is the cocoon phase. In Dzogchen, this would be the path. So we start out with the base and the path, and now we're going to move to the fruit, which is the third part of the Zen expression that says, to forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. This is the top of the circle, which I see as the world, or the Christians would call the Holy Ghost. Think like illusion or Maya. Or Ananda, which refers to bliss. In Zen, this is where once again rivers are rivers and mountains are just mountains. But just like the caterpillar, who is the same after the cocoon phase, it's just a more evolved version, a deeper version of itself, because it went through the void. You went from the base to the path to the fruit. In Dzogchen, this would be the fruit. All right, so now we're going to move to number 4. Number 4 says, when actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the body and mind of others. Now we're going to move to number 4. Number 4 says, when actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the body and mind of others, drops away. This is a description of the fruit, which is simply the dropping away of the sense of a you and others. And I think it's important to recognize the importance of the word and when I say you and others. I still have a sense of self while simultaneously having a sense of others, since I recognize self and others to be part of the same continuum. That is what the Zen saying actually means when it says that it's the myriad things that actualize you. There is no self without others. There is no others without self. There's nothing to separate self from others. The void, or the world, the void self-world is a continuum. The triunistic teaching is the fruit. And what I wanted to point out there is that this demonstrates that everything in the world is content in you, which is space. So we could put I thought about that, if I could draw sadness or anger or even the process of identification, I would have put that there. I would have drawn that on here. But I think all that is symbolized by you, the body. That's the body and mind that drops away. There's no sense of a you and others. But I think it's really important to point out that when you back up and see that you're the void witness, just a pure awareness watching this, like I saw with the movie screen, then you'll see that everything appears on the screen, even your feelings, your emotions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your enlightenment, your experiences, you're identifying. So that's why I liked it when someone understood what I meant by saying, identifying is okay, just don't identify with the identifying. Things will appear, including identifying. Just don't identify with them or attach to them. Or if you attach to them, just don't attach to that. But if you do attach to that, then just don't attach to that. So on and so forth. And that's something I learned from Dzogchen, Namkeen Norbu in particular. All right, so we're going to continue. And if you really understand this fruit deeply, then you understand the only thing that I've ever wanted to share. I see this triunistic truth in every truth I see, whether it be from religion, science, nature, society, etc. The triunistic perspective is self-arising and self-sustaining, as well as self-annihilating. And that is why I love the very last line of the Zen saying, which says, no trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. And as I said earlier, when I recently decided to start my books again, I looked at the very last journal from nearly 10 years ago and found those to be the last words that I ever wrote. All right, so there are so many things that I got from that short quote, but the particular aspect that I was drawn to was how I was now seeing the myriad things as the Dharmakaya itself. Of course, I had previously recognized the Dharmakaya to be the Nirmanakaya, but I was looking at the Nirmanakaya as a whole. So as a whole, I knew in any given scene is just an outward expression of the Dharmakaya, but I really never gave much thought to all the infinite specifics that make up any given scene. As a result of this, I realize now that I saw the world as an impediment or as an irrelevant distraction to the Dharmakaya. As if the world, or Dharmakaya, was obscuring the Dharmakaya. So for me, all the worldly things in life were silly illusions to be seen through, obstacles to the great Dharmakaya. But now my attention had been drawn to the infinite specifics in life that make up the Nirmanakaya, or world of form. I had now become intrigued with seeing how every tiny detail of this world, or Nirmanakaya, was in fact the Dharmakaya itself. I started to look at my daily life differently, how all the little things were actually perfect reflections of the whole, reflections of the Brahman itself. The politics on TV, the weather, the economy, family dynamics, math, personal psychology, sociology, movies, the arts, insects, colonies, civilizations, chemistry, social dynamics, astronomy, emotions, advertising, dating, mating, organizing, blowing shit up, collecting, analyzing, loving, hating, growing, sports, competition, music, etc., forever. Every single thing in particular was nothing other than the very Dharmakaya itself. Recognizing everything in the world, including human interactions, as a dance of the divine, I turned my attention back to the world. However, now seeing it from a further evolved perspective, having going from the base path and fruit, the world I saw in front of me now was recognized as the very same void I saw behind me. So now the physical world intrigued me as I now saw it as the Dharmakaya screaming out its truth through the myriad things. But as I switched my focus from inward to outward, what I discovered was a world that I had abandoned. I never realized that I abandoned the world, but I was beginning to get the picture that in my quest for the pursuit of truth, I abandoned everything else, including my family. So to best describe what happened next, I find it useful to go back to the perfect domesticated life that I described from 2006 to 2014. All right, so I'll go back to the end of chapter 5 and repeat a little bit of that just to bridge that with the final chapter. It was around this time, 2006, that I reached what I felt to be my domestic peak. Each day with my family unfolded so perfectly that I felt like a dream that I was making up myself. I only have to work 3 days a week, so my weekends felt like little vacations in the mountains. We would explore the area during the day and come in at night to play games and watch America's Funniest Home Videos. And while the pugs ran around attacking each other, and the TV every time an animal appeared. After having so many successive nights that I felt to be absolute perfect day, I was feeling like I had gotten everything out of the domesticated human experience that is possible. I had what I felt to be the most perfect family life, the perfect job, the perfect home, the perfect area, etc., etc. I remember telling my wife that if anything ever happened to her and my daughter, that I would not want to start another family. I had felt so fulfilled by the life that I had with my family that I just didn't think that I would have the desire to do it again if I was given the chance. Okay, so that's the frame of mind I'm in when, in October of 2014, in a calm, cool manner that indicated that she was clearly giving this a lot of thought, my wife of 20 years lets me know that she was going to leave me. Yeah, I just want to let that shock settle in to give you the tiniest taste of how it felt to have the world suddenly and without warning ripped out from underneath of me. The sudden pressure drop, the vacuum in the air after these words hit my ear, the inability to even process what you just heard. And it wasn't even that she wanted to leave me just then at the moment. In fact, she didn't even say that she wanted to leave me. She just said that she didn't see us growing old together, which meant that she didn't see us lasting long as a couple to make it to old age. But for me, someone who thought we had the greatest marriage ever and was lucky enough to find my soulmate, those words indicated that our marriage was over, or at the very least, the end of the marriage that I thought that I was in. The marriage that I was in up until this terrifying moment was a fairy tale. My adult life felt like the whole scene in Vanilla Sky where Tom Cruise's character suddenly realizes that not only has he only been dreaming his whole life, but it was so obviously dreamlike, complete with the cliche Ferrari, the mansion, the beautiful wife. And that is how my wife made me feel, as if my life was a childish fantasy that I just took to be real life. From the very moment that I ever laid eyes on her, I knew that she was the one. Even after she finally agreed to go on a date with me, and that date had to be at church, which would be a first for me, I immediately told my best friend that she would be the one that I would marry. For myself, our marriage was that kind of magic. But apparently, not so for my wife. For her, our marriage was no fairy tale at all. So, after many painful discussions, things would only get worse. I discovered that not only my wife, but my 18-year-old daughter, too, had deep-seated pain from my abandonment of them. Now, they did not use the word abandonment to describe how they felt, but it was obvious to me that is what I had done when I one-pointedly aimed all of my passions toward the pursuit of truth. They desperately wanted and needed a present and engaged husband and a father, but what they got was someone who took them for granted and just assumed that my love for them was enough. But what good is your love for someone else if they don't actually experience it for themselves? And the failure on my end to make sure that they experienced my love had disastrous effects for all of us. As months go by with me fighting for my family, my daughter angrily pulls away from me, and my wife I would separate. My daughter would pull away, and my wife and I would separate and eventually plan our divorce. Despite my abandonment of my family, I was actually incredibly attached to them, and fought constantly to keep them from giving up on me. I listened to them. I expressed a willingness to change. I bargained with them. I reasoned with them, pleaded with them. But it very slowly became obvious that the pain that I had caused them was too deep to forgive me in the time frame that I was looking for. My wife leaving me was confusing and bewildering, and that is terrifying in itself. But the pain that I had caused my daughter was a gut punch to the very depths of my soul. This was an unrecoverable pain and the source of the total madness that I would soon experience for the first time in my life. My nightmare had become true, where my daughter would have to suffer the very same child trauma as I did. When I was 21 years old, my biological father died, but he actually left my family when I was only 3 years old. So I only have vague memories of him from my very early childhood. When I found out about his death, I found out more about his life and how alcoholism caused him to abandon his family. And I remember very clearly how I answered my mother when she asked how I was processing my father's death and everything that I was learning about him. I remember telling her that I would use this experience to learn from it and never make the same mistake with my kids that he did with me. So, you can only imagine the horrors that I experienced when I realized that no matter how much I did not want to repeat the mistakes of my father and cause abandonment issues with my own child, I managed to do it anyways. The only thing that I promised myself I would never do, I found I did. The irony just rubbed in my face how we cannot escape from ourselves no matter how hard we try. We can avoid certain traits or aspects of ourselves, but we cannot escape our unconsciousness. The pain of fighting for my family lasted over a year, and what a wretched year it was. I had become seriously depressed and anxious for the first time in my life, and with each passing month, it would only get worse and worse. I started to drink alcohol heavily to mute the pain that pervaded my daily experience, but I would do nothing to address the pain itself. I had earned the pain with my actions or inactions. The pain is what it was. That was reality. All that existed was pain. And as I alluded to earlier, I just had no desire or inclination to go beyond the pain. As far as I was concerned, pain was all there was at that time. Incidentally, at no point did this conflict with what I knew to be a perfect reality, a self-perfected view of nature. I knew even this pain was perfect, and that it made sense whether I liked it or not. I never had the thought that depression or anxiety should not occur, so I did not ever struggle with it or make it go away, or try to make it go away. I knew that time was the only factor in every perceived wrong in this world. So I knew it was only through time that this situation would right itself, and it may not even be in Mark's lifetime. But it's not like I was waiting for this to end either, because I knew that the self-perfected nature of reality meant that there are infinite permutations of everything. And that means that there are some permutations where certain forms are front-loaded with great experiences at the beginning and horrible ones at the end. And who is to say what Mark's experience is when all this is said and done? Anything is possible. And it wouldn't have surprised me if my life continued to spin out to even darker depths of hell. So, the peak of my hell came to a fever pitch, Thanksgiving of 2015. I remember the date because my sister was supposed to come down with her family and visit, but she canceled at the last minute. My wife and daughter were both at the house to meet my sister and her family, and they had just gotten a phone call from my sister letting us know that her and her family would not be able to make it for Thanksgiving. And the void of my sister's absence only accentuated the vast emptiness that was palpable or palpably thick in my house. Now we would all have to face that heavy emptiness of a failed family on Thanksgiving, all alone with ourselves. And every other time in my life, the word emptiness would resonate very highly and positive for me. But right now, when I'm remembering the emptiness that filled the house that day, there's not a shred of positivity or lightness that I could feel in the word empty. The emptiness that I am describing now is heavy, dark, painful, and soul-wrenching. So I can remember lying in bed on Thanksgiving morning, hearing my wife and daughter receive the phone call from my sister letting us know she wouldn't be able to make it for Thanksgiving. I had been up all night preparing everything, so I was not ready to wake when my sleep was interrupted by my sister's calling to cancel. Now that I knew my sister was not going to come, the emptiness of the house was too much to bear. I could hear the muffled voices of my wife and daughter, and it just made me feel alienated as I sunk deeper into my own dark despair. I tried to finish my sleep, but instead of sleeping, I would slip between nightmares, hellish thoughts, and a foreboding sense of impending doom. This continued for hours, and I felt too paralyzed to come out of this hell. And even if I did want to come out of it, the muffled sounds of my family's voices in the other room was a reminder that I would not be a welcome face. This is when I got my first and hopefully last taste of what I take to be true madness. And I don't say that lightly. Madness is the first and only word I thought of when I first came out of this experience. And to this very day, whenever I go back and reflect on this memory, I know this madness to be the ultimate hell of all hells. And that's because it is the mind turning on itself. So there I was, trapped in my bedroom with all the hellish world that I had constructed in my head. I would drift in and out of various nightmares where I was shown how much I hurt my daughter. The dream images would be from every corner imaginable, including death, pleads from the beyond, soul-crushing sadness, and pain that somehow managed to hit every pain point. And of course, your mind knows you better than anything, so it knows exactly where to go to maximize that pain. My mind had become my worst enemy. What was once an asset was now a liability. Every corner of my mind was blackened with pain, and every turn I made was met with darker darkness. There was no escape from the harsh rebuke of my mind. Nowhere to go where there was no pain. And when I say there was nowhere to go, where this pain was not already there, waiting for me, is no exaggeration. And this is what I mean by the word madness. This bout of madness was the only time ever in my life where I felt the loop of my experience to be wound so tight that there was no possibility of anything but inescapable madness. There was no way out. I had the palpable sensation that was like not being able to find a wall behind me that I could lean against to have all the world in front of me. There was no foundation to rest, and no space that was not filled with terror, no corner of the universe to find refuge. The peak of this inescapable madness was the overwhelming feeling that I broke someone's soul. The damage that I did was so pervasive that I actually broke someone out the very foundation. And this played out in visions and nightmares where I could see this continuing beyond death and cutting across dimensions of all time and space, as if I literally fucked up the whole goddamn universe beyond repair. An existential failure to the core. Now that I reflect back on it, I think that what we refer to as madness is just the act of trying to escape from something that bears itself out as an endless loop. That was the main dynamic of the whole nightmarish episode, constantly finding the same nightmare at every turn. No matter where I looked, I could only find the same horror that was me. No escape from this self-consuming black hole of hatred, self-hatred. So, after having gone through all that, I wish I had a great turnaround story to tell you. But as I reflect back on it now, there was no magic moment to turn it all around. The only thing that I had going for me was acceptance. I knew I had fought every angle to try to right my wrongs, and the situation was just hopeless. So I eventually just gave up and accepted the total loss of everything that I knew my family life to be. As 2016 began, I felt like I had died to my previous life, but my new life had not even been born yet. It was as if I was in a gestational state. It was only in May of 2016 that I finally got over my failed marriage, and I was at total peace with it. I went to Red Rocks, Colorado by myself on what would have been our 21st wedding anniversary, and I saw two of my favorite current bands, the Flamin' Lips and My Morning Jacket. I had a great time, although it was weird being by myself on a vacation, but I knew what this was and exactly what I needed at that time. After that vacation, I immediately had to go to Maryland for my grandmother's funeral and had a good time visiting family that I had not seen in a long while. But then I would finish that month by visiting my best friend in Myrtle Beach. I told my wife that I'd be moving out to Myrtle Beach and she would be able to start her new life anywhere she wanted. I think that when my wife saw that I'd finally moved on and stopped fighting for her, it was able to give her the space to see that she actually did not want to be without me in her life. So eventually we gave our relationship another chance, but from the perspective of the marriage that we had is dead, but we are still two people that love each other and that could create a new relationship based on the two people that we had become rather than who we were. So in August, we took a vacation to St. Lucia. We fell in love with the island and decided to start our new life in the tropics. We thought of Thailand and other islands, but ultimately chose Tampa, St. Pete, Florida, so our daughter could move down and live near us. And yes, we did end up moving down here, and our daughter did join us down here, but don't let that lead you to believe that my nightmare was over. That chapter may have been over, but a new chapter complete with anxiety and depression was about to begin. After we decided to move to Florida, we spent the next year working around the clock to fix our house up with a total renovation inside and out to get it ready to sell. Then we had to make plans to find a place in Florida, find new jobs, and start all over again with a new life. So almost a year later, June of 2017, we quit our jobs of 17 years and moved to the St. Petersburg area of Florida. We're just blocks away from the Gulf of Mexico with dozens of beautiful beaches, all within a quick drive. So we definitely took full advantage of the vacation area that we moved to. We had Honeymoon Island Dog Beach to take our pugs to a couple times a week. We had all the touristy attractions from St. Petersburg, Tampa, Orlando, even only Miami's a few short hours away. But just a short walk away from our house was the best beach town and the Pinellas Trail, which is a 45-mile paved bike or hike trail. By all accounts, things were going perfectly, even better than we could have possibly imagined. But within 3 months of living here, we found out that Bodie, our black pug, who is the leader of the pack, is dying from blood cancer. And anyone who knows us and how we treat our pugs like children, taking them with us wherever we go, putting them on a stroller, that's a huge tragedy for us. We are besides ourselves in pain and do everything we can to save him. We even discover a Chinese medicine that actually brought him back to life for some time. He was back to his normal self, but we didn't know for how long it would last. but it did give us a chance to say goodbye to him on our terms. So we took him to the dog beach every day. We took him for walks and drives whenever he wanted. He was able to give us another month, and we were infinitely grateful for that time, as we really needed it to say goodbye to someone who had become the most important dynamic in our life. But I won't try and sugarcoat it. My wife and I took his death very hard. So very hard. Words can't even begin to tell you, but anyone that has loved and lost knows what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, that is only the beginning of this painfully sad time in my life. No sooner did Bodhi die than our first pug, Kaya, started to lose her legs. She had developed a condition that slowly paralyzed her back legs, so I had to use a towel to pick her back legs up and take her on a walk on just her front legs. I bought her a tiny wheelchair cart for her back legs, but she was too small and stubborn to go for it. And I know this may sound funny, but it was truly sad to see her not be able to do her favorite things like run and fight with her stuffed animals. And while this tragedy was going on, we were discovering that the tenant we rented our house to in Virginia was crazy and literally called me every single second of the day to help her figure out how to live in the mountains and operate basic functions of the house. Also, we were having a very difficult time finding a house down here to buy. Since this was such a popular area, the houses don't even last sometimes even a day on the market. So in 2018 starts with promise. We just moved into our new dream house. We're both settled into our new jobs, and we love Florida. But the beauty of where we lived could not mask an underlying pain. The death of Bodhi still weighed heavy on us, as our pack of pugs had been the focus of our lives for over a decade. And now we had to watch our pug Kaya suffer with her paralysis and slow death. Anything that she wanted to do, we had to do it for her, since she couldn't move much. But her favorite things were barking at the television all day, eating and going for walks, which we did with a towel or a stroller. So we kept her alive as long as she had those things to enjoy. But eventually we could not manage her pain with the medication, so we had to put her down in that August, just as we did Bodhi that previous October. And it was gut-wrenching. The single worst experience in my life. I loved her so much. I've never seen that much love in my life, and the fact that it was packed into 15 pounds was just that much more amazing. The joy that she brought to my family's life was immeasurable, and I will never be grateful enough for their existence. The pain was so difficult for both my wife and I that we both noticed her sadness was so palpable that it was making our last pug, Jerry Garcia, sad too. He's the one you heard snoring in the video. We were both allowing ourselves to be so thoroughly sad that Jerry didn't even want to go on walks anymore. The vibe was so sad that he would just turn around from his walks and go back inside. So I told my wife that we have to summon the strength to pull ourselves together just enough so that Jerry can't detect our sadness, so that he could enjoy his life. So we did, and Jerry responded immediately by embracing his role as the last pug standing. But as much as I hid my sadness from Jerry, I did not hide it from myself, and I continued to mourn for Kaya and Bodhi. And at this point, I am just overwhelmed with sensory overload. The sadness for my pug's deaths, the joy of the tropical beauty around me, the cognitive demands of learning a new job and finding a new house, and the stress from the tenant that I was renting to in Virginia. The daily pestering demands that I was getting from my tenant in Virginia morphed into bizarre behavior that demanded my attention. I would hear stories about gunshots coming from my tenant's house. the police having to come by, destruction of property, and I could not get them to leave even though they stopped paying the rent. Eventually, the house was so destroyed, I just had to let it go under foreclosure. But all that just preoccupied the tiniest place in my mind. What I was really experiencing was an overload to my central nervous system. There was way too much input in such a small amount of time. My life in the mountains for the last 17 years were slow and non-worldly. And now I was in the thick of it, dealing with real estate agents, mortgage brokers, math, finances, legal stuff, researching houses, coordinating fixes for my house up north, learning a new job, meeting new people, discovering new places, being overwhelmed by the tropical beauty and the beach scenery, precious puppies dying. And I never even mentioned how when I first moved there, I crashed my car so bad that it was totaled. I felt like I'd been running through the whole spectrum of the human emotions more so in 1 year than I had in my whole previous lifetime, all together. I was at the point of critical mass, but I sensed no tipping point. This was just what my life had become. Far from the quiet mountain existence, this was life on the sun. All the buttons had been turned up all the way, and I was acutely aware of my previous conscious decision to dive into the Nirmanakaya as if it was a day at the beach. Ironically, my new beach life was anything but a day at the beach. And I think that's why my life had become a numb state of anxiety/depression. Well, actually, it was at least two things. The first was the incredible pain and sadness of losing our pugs in quick succession. But the second dynamic was that all the wonderful things that we were experiencing, including the natural beauty, the touristy fun stuff, and all the great charms of Tampa and St. Pete as cities, all of these wonderful things just emphasized the emptiness that lurked underneath all the fun and the beautiful scenery. And again, I know I usually use the word emptiness in glowing terms, but in reference to what I'm describing now, I am using the word empty to refer to a flatness in my spirit, in my sense of vitality. There was nothing there for me, no spark, no joy. Happiness? Yeah, I won't deny that. There was some happiness. You can't go down a roller coaster or stare at waves on a beach all day and not be happy. But I'm talking beyond the surface. There was a deep pain that could not be fooled with moments or even days of consecutive happiness. The flatness had begun to become so familiar to me that I would often hear a song spring up from inside my head. I'm half the man I used to be. I don't know exactly why this song constantly popped up in my head, but I interpreted this to express how I felt like I had become a shadow of my former self. I felt like I was now just an imprint left from something greater that left long ago. There was an energy there that was no longer. And all the wonderful things that would happen in the course of life would only draw my attention to this vacuous hole that was once a spark. Listening to music during this particular year of my life was often a reminder of this black hole that was always lurking. Throughout my life, listening to music has always been a thing of magic. And if I ever discovered something amazing that was ever new to me, the magic was on a whole other level. So much so that I can still remember every single one of those seldom experiences where I had the pleasure of discovering some new musical act that was new to me. The last time this happened was during this particular sad year of my life. The name of the band is the Black Keys, and although they had been around forever, I never got around to listening to them. But as soon as I heard them, I fell instantly in love and was soon listening to about 8 of their albums in a constant rotation. It had been forever since I had the pleasure of discovering someone this great that was new to me. And now I had Florida's tropical scenery as the beautiful backdrop to this joyous music. But the more beauty I saw and the more joy I felt from this music, it only served as a reminder of something that was missing, or more correctly, muted. I think this whole dynamic of having beauty and joyful activities seeming to create depression and anxiety peaked when we found our Florida home. I had always wanted a pool, and this house was built around the pool area, making it like a little tropical resort in our backyard. It was like a dream come true, and I think that is why every time I heard the new Black Keys song, Bullet in My Brain, I envisioned blowing my brains out in that pool. It was the first time in my life that I truly had suicidal ideation. And it wasn't even that I actually wanted to blow my head off in that pool, but the idea that I could do that anytime I wanted was a comforting thought. It was a very violent thought, to be sure, but I experienced it as a reassuring thought. I even knew at the time what all this imagery meant to me. The song, Bullet in My Brain, has nothing whatsoever to do with suicide and is actually a very happy song with an uplifting beat. So when I listened to it, it stimulated and made me feel euphoric. But as I said before, the more joy I felt, the more this joy pointed back to the flatness that was underneath. And I know what it's like to be throws in the total absorption of beautiful music. I've been there countless times in my life, but this time, that joy of the music only served to highlight the emptiness or flatness that just lay beneath the surface. So as I'm singing the joyous refrain of "Bullet in my brain," I sense the flatness under the joy, and it's immediately deflating. That feeling of deflated fuses with the same deflated feeling I get when I look at our beautiful pool and I think, this was your fantasy, and you're still not happy. That pool had come to represent the symbol of a celebration of life that I pursued in Florida. But the sad fact was that I didn't feel celebratory except in the most superficial sense of being relieved that all the hard work and chaos of uprooting ourselves finally paid off with exactly what I had imagined. Blowing my head off in my pool was a hostile fantasy seemingly directed at the pool itself. I remember feeling anger at the blood-filled pool that I imagined as I listened to and sang aloud with the lyrics, "Bullet in my brain." I also knew that the reason I was angry at this pool was because it was a painful reminder of the emptiness that had consumed my life. For good or ill, true to my nature, I never saw any of this as a problem, so I did nothing about it. This was just the down part of the movie. You gotta have conflict to have resolution. But I'm sitting here talking to you now. So obviously I did survive this hell, and I want to be there for anybody who is going through something similar. Not because I have any magical answers, because I don't. How the spark finally made its way back into my life was spontaneous and anticlimactic. I only want to be there for others so they know that they're not alone and that things do change. February of 2019 was when I hit my rock bottom. Like I said, it was anticlimactic, nothing exciting. I was just so low on energy that it got to the point that I was running on empty. And my wife had noticed, despite my best efforts to not let it be seen. I kept promising that I would do something to take care of myself, but I never did anything. The truth is that I would know where to begin. Any movement of my mind would seem false right from the jump. So I was at a loss even if I wanted to do something. But it all came to a head one day when my wife accidentally painted our very large and high ceiling in off-white that came out as dark gray. The whole living room seemed to be under a very dark and gray, menacing sky. We had to wait a day to paint over it, but that day, as I sat under that dark gray sky that was in my living room, I bottomed out. There's literally nothing to write about. No cool stories or insights that I received. I don't even really remember that day, as I just laid lifeless on my couch, being weighed down by the heavy gray sky that had sunk through my living room ceiling, permeated the room. The only reason that day is even significant is because when my wife came home from work, she rushed through the door and ran to my side and begged me to tell her that I was okay. Her heart was so heavy all day while at work, just feeling the weight of my experience, that she worried for my very being. I should point out that my wife has always been extremely empathetic. She's always been able to feel what I'm feeling, and I as a result, I can't lie to her. I mean, I try, I lie, but it doesn't work. She sees right through me. So she was feeling that pain was so palpable, that heaviness from that day being under that gray sky in my living room was so palpable. She felt it all day at work. So when she came home and rushed and was asking me, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I just knew. This was no longer about me. So it was at that point I realized this was not just about me, but how I affected those around me. I promised to make an appointment to see a doctor. And I knew all a doctor would do was prescribe medication. And I've always been skeptical about the overprescription of antidepressants. But beggars can't be choosers. So with an attitude of total indifference, I took the antidepressants. I was not expecting anything or very much, but to my surprise, the effects were positive and virtually immediate. It was as if the missing spark that I was talking about was just a chemical in my brain. Serotonin or whatever. Everything was the exact same, but this missing chemical was like the air that inflated the animal balloon. With air, you have a strong and virile animal formed from a balloon. And without the air, you just have a lifeless and shapeless, empty piece of rubber. These pills were like the air in the animal balloon. Since these pills had an immediate effect, I stopped taking them immediately. Now that I felt fully inflated, I wanted to take care of myself on my own terms and my own understanding. I knew that I needed to throw myself off of a cliff. I needed a dramatic shakeup. I needed to reinvigorate my sense of purpose again, to experience a passion for something. So in March of 2019, I started to finally take care of myself. And I had gained so much weight in the last few years that this was the most obvious place to start. And it's funny because nature has a way of preparing us. And the last time I felt a spontaneous urge to get myself healthy, it turned out that I was unwittingly preparing my body for experiences into salvia space. And for those who don't know, salvia divinorum is a legal entheogen that I explored 20 years ago. Sure enough, soon after I spontaneously decided to get my body healthy, the topic of another legal entheogen came to my attention. The magic mushroom had been getting a lot of positive attention from the medical community for its psychological benefits. Now, this is the cliff that I was looking to jump off of. This was the dramatic shakeup that I was looking for. So the following month, I arranged to travel to a locality where one could safely and legally procure some of these medicinal mushrooms, and I proceeded to eat them. And eat them all I did. Now, I won't bore you with the details of my experience with these medicinal mushrooms, but I will tell you that this experience woke something up in me that goes way beyond the air in the animal balloons that I likened to the antidepressants. This was a genuine life shift. I spontaneously stopped drinking alcohol that day, and it's not even something that I even thought about. I wasn't even going into it, even complaining about alcohol. I just suddenly realized that I don't like alcohol, and yet I was drinking every day. I ended up losing 100 pounds that year easily. No problem, no dieting, no rules, just a radical new relationship to food and probably everything else for that matter. My passion for music was back, and in fact, the emptiness that I previously described while happily listening to music was only fully realized when this passion returned. What had happened was one day I was listening to the Black Keys again, and I was really enjoying it when I realized that the emptiness was not there that had been, when I realized that the emptiness that was there a year ago had been filled with radiance and illumination. It was actually only then that I fully recognized the past presence of that deep emptiness that accompanied everything, including this wonderful album. It was as if I was listening to the same album without a muffling cloud over it. Basically what I'm saying is that epiphany that I had about the music and how the joy of the music would make me feel sad, I didn't even really totally realize it until I had this new experience listening to the same band, the same album, and realizing, oh my God, there's something there that I could very distinctly remember not being there. You know, last year when I was listening to the Black Keys, I would feel the happiness and the joy from the music, but it would be a reminder of this emptiness. But like I said, I was never really fully aware of that until now, when that emptiness wasn't there. That contrast made me realize, wow, like I could see the contrast and the change just by listening to the music for how it made me feel then compared to how it made me feel now. All right. The sense of a new life that was sparked in March only expanded deeper and deeper every day, reaching a fever pitch on my 50th birthday in November, this past November. I was almost front row at the Black Keys concert, and this was the first band that I had seen that was big enough to play an arena since the Grateful Dead over 25 years ago. And when the lights went up after the show, I suddenly realized that I was so much stronger than I was 25 years ago, at the Grateful Dead concerts. My age and my experience had strengthened my very being. And this was so palpable due to the contrast and experience I had when the lights end at the end of the concert. When the lights go up at the end of the concert. I had been in this very same scene so many times in my life before, and it is a very familiar scene, being at a very large arena and having the lights go up after a high energy show and watching the audience slowly meander out of the arena and back to their cars. But this time, as I sat with the stage to my back and took in that familiar scene in front of me, it dawned on me that I was exactly the same person that I was over a quarter century ago, taking in the same familiar scene from a Grateful Dead show. And I know it is far from revolutionary to point out that we are the same people, but hopefully stronger in the future. But that's not the gist of what I'm trying to get at. What I experienced was more of a contrast and similar experiences, and the very contrast itself demonstrated the dramatic increase in energy and vitality that was even more palpable upon this recognition. Bottom line was that on my 50th birthday, instead of feeling like I got a year older, I felt like I suddenly got 20 years younger. I felt closer to 30 than to the 50 that I actually was. I knew that this latest cocoon phase that I had been through had been in preparation for something that I didn't even know what. I felt like I was a sword that had been dipped in hot lava so that I could get hammered out and reshaped so that when I cooled, I would be transformed. And I'm more than happy to oblige reality in whatever it has in store for me, even if it includes the burning and the smashing. I trust where it's taking me. Just after my birthday, which was on the 11th of November, and just before my family came out to visit on Thanksgiving Day, I became overwhelmed with the feeling that the world was ending, or perhaps just my world was ending. But definitely a feeling that the world was either ending or perhaps already ended, and we just haven't taken the hint yet. This takes me back to where I restarted this conversation about my feeling nostalgic about a world that still appears. I felt a tenderness for everyone and a sentimental feeling of missing the world, even while it still appears. I don't know what to do with all these tender waves of sentimentality and nostalgia or my newfound strength and energy. I felt like I was all power, but nowhere to point it, nowhere to direct it. That is, until February of 2020, when I discovered Jordan Peterson. And yes, I know I was very late to the Jordan Peterson phenomena, and I know that he's a very controversial figure, but I have no interest in listening to his talks on societal issues. I only listen to his motivational talks, and boy howdy did they ever give me an ass kicking. I dropped at least 20 core beliefs in just a few hours of listening to his talks on the importance of finding meaning in life. The fact that he came to the very same realizations as the Buddhists, and that's not even his thing, that just reinforced the fact that anyone, given enough time and inclination, will come to the very same truth or truths when they just observe reality as it is. At any rate, it was only because I listened to Jordan Peterson's talks on the importance of finding meaning in life that I was moved to get back to finishing my books. Only now it will be out of the sheer joy of sharing my life experiences instead of withholding them and blocking the natural flow. So the reward is having fun, going back over all this from a new perspective, and the knowing that it is touching someone in the same way that I've been touched by so many others. And I know it's a very tiny and rare audience, but this is pretty rare material, so I get it. And now that I got this all out of my system, I could finally end with my third and final book of the Triune. Or actually what I said was, I could finally end with my third and final book of the trilogy. The third book is the material that I've been looking forward to sharing even before the first book was finished. In fact, it was my obsession with the material in the third book that made me lose interest in discussing my first book. So now we've come full circle. Here we are. Everything that I wrote for book 2 and 3 was already written when I put out book 1, but you just read the story of why it took almost a decade for it to incubate and for it to manifest. Now that I'm doing these books as a video, I am finding it so fun that I'll go back and read and expand, on book 1 again as a video as well. I am not sure. Sorry about that. We're done anyway. I am not sure if I will do book 1 as audio first or book 3. Oh yeah. I don't need that anymore. All right. So I'm going to either do book 3 next, or if I'm not ready, if it seems like it's going to take more than a month, I'm just going to go back and read book 1 as audio video, because I enjoy doing this again. And now that I've realized how helpful and better book 2 was in video, I just realized book 1 is also going to be so much better if I read it through video, because the words are never enough. I think you really need someone there to convey the feeling that's behind the words. So I'm excited about going over and reading on video all of book 1, an expanded version of it actually too. I'll probably do, because there's so much more. I wanted to distill it to its finest point. But now that you got it, I may go back and do that over again. But the only question is what I'm going to do next. I'm not sure whether I'm going to do book 3 on video next or book 1 on video next. And what's going to determine that is how much time I think it's going to take me to finish, to get book 3 ready. Like I said, it's already written, but it's all just loose notes and just letters, and it's raw. So I need to figure out how much time it's going to take that and to type out something so I can, talk to you guys. So I don't have to pause every second and make it weird. All right, so thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed this book. That concludes book 2. I hope you enjoyed this particular chapter of my story. Thank you so much. Literally could not have done it without you. And I really, really look forward to book number 3. So have a great day. Bye-bye.
But if I go mad, no one will know it. I won't let it be seen. 'Cause I don't want you to be sad.